I always get a little suspicious when I see a new model in which all the elements start with the same letter or happen to spell out some key word or other. I always wonder whether there was some fantastic ingredient which was considered but rejected because it didn't happen to start with the right letter. Well, I'm afraid I've been tempted. So, welcome to the 7Cs. In exploring the 7Cs, what we're actually going to be doing is looking at some of the most common elements in workplace learning interventions. Now, let's start off by looking at what those interventions are trying to achieve. They're probably going to be looking to do one or more of the following. Firstly, to gain commitment to change from the learner, which is a sort of prerequisite. Then hopefully to build competence so that the learner is able to carry out the required tasks, and then inspire a degree of confidence so the learner has the self-belief to put those competencies into action. There are three familiar ingredients which we'll find in most traditional and, to be fair, most current learning interventions. The first of those is the class. And classes can be online or face-to-face. They can be less than an hour. They could go on for weeks, theoretically at least. And they can vary widely in terms of the strategy they use. So they might be just expositional in the sense that there's some sort of lecture or presentation taking place. Perhaps they're more instructional, so there are all sorts of activities as well. Or they could be essentially guided discovery. So this is a sort of facilitated session in which you're trying to help the learner to gain insights. So, as well as classes, we also have content, which is really the sort of self-paced equivalent to classes. So, content could theoretically be in a variety of forms, but it's nearly always these days digital and online. Content could again follow a number of strategies. It could be expositional, so it could be videos or podcasts. It could be instructional, like typical e-learning, or it could be more guided discovery, something like a simulation or scenario or a game. Then if there are, perhaps several classes or a mixture of classes and contents and other activities in one blend, then it's also quite common to have cohorts. So cohorts are essentially small groups of learners going through the same experience at the same time. So content, classes, cohorts, three very common ingredients which we'll find in most learning interventions. You don't need me to tell you that workplace learning is changing quite a bit. First of all, there's an increased emphasis away from formal elements to those which are embedded in the work environment. Plus, at the same time, learners are more confident and self-reliant than they were before. So this is essentially bringing into focus a number of new elements which are much more common in the interventions that we put in place. The first of these is curation. Now, curated content differs from the content we've talked about already today because this is not made specially for the purpose. It takes advantage of the fact that there's a huge amount of content already out there on the internet and on organizations' networks. Now, there may be a curator who finds the right content and organizes it, enhances it in various ways, and then makes it available. But it could also be made available by peers, and it could also be made available through intelligent software. Coaching, of course, is not a new element, but it is interesting to see how much it's being introduced into larger workplace interventions. So coaching could come from a manager, it could come from a subject specialist, it could come from a coach, or it could come from a peer. But whichever way it happens, it's offering some sort of personalised support which otherwise isn't going to be there in a large-scale intervention. Then there are challenges. By this, we don't mean those sort of exercises which take place in a classroom or in interactive content. We're talking about more major projects undertaken by individuals or groups in the real work environment. Now, these might be essentially informal and negotiated with a coach or manager, or they might form part of a formal program. Then there are communities. Now, social learning in its early days didn't deliver quite on the hype, but is certainly coming more of age, whether that's because of better platforms, more support from above, or perhaps it's just that employees are now more ready and willing to share in a digital learning environment. Again, social learning could be incredibly informal, but we are seeing more structured communities playing a part in interventions as well. Major learning interventions are likely to include many, if not sometimes all, of the ingredients we've talked about today. While the three traditional elements, the content, the classes and cohorts, are still going to play a part, we're going to see a much greater importance attached to the new ingredients, which is great, but we're going to make very limited progress even with these new ingredients if there aren't the right conditions in the organisation to support the learning that we'd like to see happen. That's typically going to mean senior management commitment, as well as the right policies and platforms in place to make everything possible. Now, learning professionals are going to find themselves increasingly out there exploring the 7 Cs, and they will encounter some dangers, and it will be tempting to return to their home ports. But those that persist will definitely be the winners, because there are some fantastic opportunities out there to be exploited. Goodbye.